Hello and welcome to Nutshell Recaps. This video explains the synopsis of the movie, Secret Window. Warning, there will be spoilers, so proceed with caution. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, it will really help our channel grow. A writer by the name of Mort breaks into a motel and takes a key to a room. All he can do is yell at them when he discovers his wife having an affair with Ted, his best friend, inside. Brokenhearted, Mort spends 6 months alone in his remote cabin writing a book he never gets to finish. One day, a man going by the name of Shooter approaches Mort at his cabin and claims that he stole his narrative. Shooter tries to offer Mort his work to prove it, but Mort ignores him and simply shuts the door. Mort denies it. After the gunman departs, Mort discovers that he has left his novel, which is named The Sowing Season. Gravely certain that he has never heard his story, Mort tosses the manuscript in the garbage. Mort is continuing working on the book the following day, which appears to be based on his own narrative. He discovers the manuscript his flatmate left on the table when he enters the kitchen. Mort, intrigued, chooses to read it now. When he finds out how similar Shooter's manuscript is to his, he is astonished. To make sure there are no inconsistencies, he picks up his book and reads the story called Secret Window. His ex-wife Amy gives him a call one day to see how he's doing. When Mort inquires about Ted, we learn that the two have been sharing a home that Mort purchased. He seems to be implying that he is still envious of Ted, which upsets Amy and causes Mort to regretfully end the call. Mort asks the gunman he meets while strolling through the woods whether he has read the text. An elderly man named Greenleaf waves at them as they travel by. When Mort asked the shooter when he had written his manuscript, he replied that it had been 7 years. Mort claims that he never plagiarized his story because it had already been published in a mystery magazine 2 years prior. A copy of the magazine was in his former home, but the gunman becomes enraged and demands proof. Mort is given 3 days by him to get it from his wife. Mort confides in his dog about his predicament and says he doesn't want to call his wife, once more only to get the magazine. Later, he falls asleep and awakens to a nightmare in which he tumbles off a cliff. He discovers a note from the shooter reminding him of his deadline as he gets outside. Next to it lies a white cloth, which, when opening, reveals his deceased dog stabbed with a screwdriver. Mort locks his windows and door because he's terrified and angry at the same time. When he reports the event to the sheriff the following morning, the officer downplays the murder and says they can't punish him because he killed an animal. As a result, Mort approaches his friend Ken, a private investigator, for assistance. When he returns to his former residence, later to retrieve the magazine, he discovers Ted and his ex-wife heading out on a date. Therefore, he makes the decision to return home. There, he runs into Ken, who tells him he's already investigated the area and there's nothing to be concerned about. Mort recalled that Greenleaf had gone by when he was speaking with the shooter in the woods, and the detective asked whether anyone else had seen the gunman. Mort goes outside to smoke after Ken leaves, and a gunman emerges out of nowhere. He requests that Mort alter the conclusion of the secret window to align with his text so that he can sign his name and have it published. The shooter threatens to harm his ex-wife if he declines. When Mort becomes enraged, the shooter overwhelms him and tries to beat the man with a shovel. He tells Mort to show him the magazine as proof as he heads out. Mort realized he had neglected to connect the phone connection when he could not sleep that night. His ex-wife Emmy answers the phone when he plugs it in, and she sounds really concerned. She claims that when the fire chief arrived at the scene, they discovered that arson had caused the house to burn. When the police ask if they have any enemies, Mort responds that he does, after someone purposefully set fire to their home. Mort becomes irate with Ted in the insurance office because Ted is attempting to interfere with their unresolved divorce and property issues. Outside, Ted advises him to get his divorce finalized and to stop upsetting Emmy. As soon as Mort gets home, Ken calls to let him know that a copy of the magazine will be sent to him by Mort's agent. Although Ken claims to have met Greenleaf, he did not witness Mort and the gunman together. He believes the shooter might have put him in danger. Mort thinks immediately of Ted, and Ken feels the gunman was hired by someone who doesn't like Mort. He claims to have met the shooter when Ken presses for further information. Mort claims that the gunman grabbed him, leaving bruises on his arms. In order to find out the truth, the investigator instructs him to bring the manuscript and his bruises as proof. Then, they will meet Greenleaf at the cafe the next morning. Mort wakes up late for their meeting since he still has trouble falling asleep. He finds the shooter's hat outside and brings it with him as more proof. He goes to the meeting spot, but when he gets there, neither Greenleaf nor Ken are there. Ted confronts Mort on the way back, demanding to know if he signed the divorce documents, but Mort declines. Mort teases Ted because he thinks the gunman is working for him. The gunman calls Mort when he gets home and arranges a meeting place in the woods. Upon his arrival, he finds that Greenleaf and Ken have been killed. Fear overwhelms Mort, and he collapses. When he wakes up, he discovers the gunman and tries to run away, but his legs are still weak. Mort declares he is heading to the police, but the shooter informs him that he will be held responsible for the murders since he owns the axe and screwdriver that were used to kill them. The man gives him 2 hours to get the magazine and threatens to harm him and everyone in his life if he goes to the police once more. Mort drives the car carrying their bodies off a cliff where it sinks out of fear that he would be held responsible for their passing. When Amy phones Mort again later, we learn that their marriage was already having problems prior to the affair. Mort's mental distance from her began when they lost their baby. Amy lacked the confidence to tell Ted what had happened, even though she and Ted were meant to tell him since. Mort becomes enraged and smashes the phone when she reminds him to sign the divorce papers. Amy has made the decision to speak with Mort and finalize their divorce. Ted wants to accompany her, but she says no, fearing that his presence will infuriate Mort even more. To get the magazine, Mort shows up at the post office. Just as he opens it, the sheriff spots him, so he quickly drives off. Upon reaching his house, he discovers that the parcel has already been opened. He opens the mystery magazine and finds the tale he published, Secret Window, but the page has already been chopped out. Trying to figure out how the gunman may have done it, when he had the package with him the entire time and then dismissed it. Mort, who is still thinking things through, puts on Shooter's hat and begins talking to himself in an attempt to make sense of what is going on. He's not sure if the shooter was real, but Mort claims to have bruises, which he investigates and finds are not there. He is being told by his imagined self that he is very dangerous and that he nearly shot Ted and his wife at the motel. He goes on to say that the shooter is a fabrication and does not exist. Mort becomes irate and tosses an ashtray against the wall. The shooter then shows up and says that Mort made him up. He reminds Mort of the time he used a Molotov to fire Amy's house and the morning he actually met Ken and Greenleaf. Greenleaf was stating that he could still clearly recall seeing Mort alone himself in the woods. We can see that he is carrying the axe and screwdriver he used to kill them as Mort orders him to pull over. Having made Shooter in the first place to change the secret window's finale, Mort now understands why. The protagonist killed his wife, according to the shooter's interpretation of events. When Amy returns later, she finds the cabin in a terrible state and discovers the shooter's manuscript along with his name carved all over the place, including the table. She finds herself shocked to see Mort behind the door with the words "shoot her" behind him, the source from whence the name Shooter was taken. At this point, he tells Amy that Mort is dead and speaks like a gunman. Attempting to flee, Amy is stopped by Mort, who uses a screwdriver to puncture her leg. She tries to get away after giving him a kick, but Mort stops her by kicking her. He's going to kill her, banging her head against a rock, when he hears Ted arrive. Mort kills him while reading the last line of his new work and strikes him with the shovel. Mort takes his ex-wife's life. When the sheriff returns to his cabin a month later, he discovers an abundance of maize in the kitchen. The writer calls Mort upstairs as the sheriff searches for him. He alerts Mort to what he done, and although there isn't enough proof to convict him right now, the sheriff is optimistic that they will ultimately locate enough bodies to do so. Simply disregards his advice and carries on eating his maize while telling stories. Shooter's manuscript is titled Sowing Season, since it is claimed that he buried the dead in the same soil that he used to grow his crops.